Muted.
She is going to lead us on an Excel webinar here for the next couple of hours. She's covering the missing manual is what she calls her presentation. She specializes in transforming people that are confused by technology into empowered users of their software tools. We are going to turn the presentation over to Melissa, and I'm going to mute everybody's microphones. So from here on out, Melissa, you get to lead the parade.
Very good, and thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. Some of you, I think as I looked at the name list just a bit ago, between the names and the firms, I recognize some folks. So good to virtually see you again, and welcome to those who I haven't had the opportunity to meet in the past. So for those of you that know anything about me, while I do teach all of the Microsoft Office applications, I always call Excel my happy place. And one of the reasons I enjoy teaching it so much is because most of us are self-taught. Those of us who had the opportunity to go to a class at one time or another came into then took the class, came back to work, and going, I don't make the connection between what I learned and what I'm doing. I am occasionally, so if you hear a pause, I am occasionally checking chat. And so if I see a question there and you hear an awkward pause, that's what that's about. I am going to run through today a couple of sections. So we're going to start with navigation and data entry shortcuts. For many of you, this is going to be the OMG moment. This is going to be the, I can't believe I didn't know that before. Given my experience with SDA, I have an idea of some of the data that you guys are working with. And so I think some of these shortcuts are going to be very helpful. That is part of the missing manual that I like to discuss is the navigation and data entry. You are spending a lot of time scrolling, and you're spending a lot of time squinting at the screen, and both of these things are time wasters. We'll talk about how formulas really work. So if you're like me and you came into Excel self-taught, I learned formulas from looking at other people's formulas, and then later on learn the foundations to why formulas work the way they do. Well, we're going to actually take it from the beginning. We're going to explain how formulas really work, why sometimes you think you should be getting one result but you end up with another. We'll then move to two very specific functions, and I think these are the two most powerful functions in Excel. With these two functions, you can create data where you don't automatically have data. So let me take it into the office management world, the back office accounting world. You might have a customer number and an outstanding balance and a due date. But if you can look at that outstanding balance and look at that due date and say if the due date's far enough back and the balance is high enough, that is a priority call, then you can actually make a column called priority column, put an X in it, filter that list, and make those calls. So it's helpful to have if and VLOOKUP, which can create data where there isn't any and cut a lot of this manual. I know a lot of you work on two monitors, and I can almost see some of you with your finger on one monitor and your finger on the other as you're squinting across and trying to match up a list. We're going to try to make that easier today with if and VLOOKUP. And then finally, pivot tables. I think as we were talking with Judy and Carrie about what you guys know and where your background is in Excel, many of you are already working in pivot tables. Now, if you're not, take a deep breath. We're going to do a little bit of a reconnoiter before we move into the now what part of I made a pivot table, now what. So it's really not as hard as a lot of people have made it out to be actually creating one, but we are going to talk about, so after you do that, what can you do with pivot tables? Where's the power? I positively rely on them in my work and in my work with other clients. We'll break at a couple of different times to check for questions. This is a 2-hour session. We're going to leave a lot of time for Q&A at the end as well. Now, there are a couple of files before we jump right in here, because I'm going to actually use these to demonstrate things. Hopefully, you have the PDF. This is the workbook for the course, for the Missing Manual course. Some of your pages will be laid out slightly differently than you see the slides on the screen. My aim here is that you need the information. You don't necessarily need the slides. So I've endeavored to make this more of a useful value add tool than just a copy of my slides, which I don't think is going to be too useful for you. And then the other thing hopefully you had access to was the class workbook. Now, if you have neither of these things, don't scramble. Stay here with me. You can take notes. You can certainly refer back. And as mentioned, this is going to be recorded, or this is being recorded, so you can work back in the exercises with the tools. Let me flip over to this workbook. The workbook is laid out for the topics that we're going to cover here, each one beginning in navigation. I think, in fact, let me do a quick poll here. And I know some of you are in rooms with a lot of people. So let's start with a couple of questions. First of all, as you look at the handout, whether you're seeing it on my screen or you're looking at it in front of you or on a note-taking device, jot down what you're hoping to learn. I'm not going to ask you to tell me those things right now, but see if you can jot down those things you're most hoping to hear about. When we break for Q&A, I'm going to have you come back to this page, check off those things that you learned, and let me know of those things that we didn't cover yet, so we make sure that we cover them in the rest of the presentation. So that's thing one. Take a moment, figure out, let us know. Thank you very much, Stephen. I appreciate that. That's going to definitely be part of what we get here. So that was VLOOKUP and pivot tables. We're totally doing that. All right. So hopefully you've taken a couple of minutes and jotted down your learning goals here today. Dog-ear this page if you've got this printed, because I will ask you to come back. How to think like a formula. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. I will keep that in my mind as I go forward. All right. Now the next question, I'm actually going to jump into chat here. I keep getting requests. I'm just going to call it out because it's the second time I've gotten this request to make someone a presenter. I'm going to leave this in Carrie's capable hands. So if you would communicate directly with Carrie if you feel like you need to be made a presenter. So I'm going to go so I can go ahead and concentrate on what's going on in the course itself. Okay, now for the rest of you. Okay, this is the poll I want to take. If you're in a room with a bunch of different people who have a bunch of different versions, try your best to get an estimate for me. I first want to know, or maybe you can just do it this way. I need to know how many people are on 2010, 2013, 2016, or on a Mac version of Excel. So if you'll come into chat, kind of take a little vote going around in your room, 2010, 2013, 2016, and Mac. All right, thank you everybody. I'm getting 2013, 2016, 2010, and a Mac, a couple of 2010, mostly 2013. Okay, 2010, Mac 2010, and PC 2010 and Mac 2011. Your Mac 2011 folks will actually be happier than your later version Mac folks. 2010 to 2013. Okay, so I've got a distribution here between 2010 and 2013 and 2016. So I think what I'm going to do, thank you, Diana, and go ahead if I didn't seem to acknowledge your answer, go ahead and keep typing them in, and I'll check back. But what I think I'm going to do, I'm going to save this guy right here as also a 2010 version. And I'm in the right spot here. Let me close this and let me open the regular version, the class file. And then I'm going to jump over here to Excel 2010, hopefully. There we go. And I'm going to open up the one I just saved. So I'm actually going to have our class file open in both versions. For most of what we're going to do today, it will not matter, and actually the positioning of many of these things is exactly the same in both versions. But where it differs, I'll let you know and jump back. When you guys come in with your questions, if you would also let me know what version you want to see the answer in, I'll jump over to that version and show you. And hopefully this will accommodate pretty much everybody. My Mac users, for the 2011 version, most of what you're going to see, actually for all your versions, most of what you're going to see is going to be the same. Where it starts to get a little different is pivot tables. I'm not a Mac expert. I know a little bit about Mac Excel. I know a little bit more than a little bit about Mac Excel, but I may choose to address your questions after the session. I chatted that in before we got started today, and please keep in mind I am available after this session. As some of you can attest to, if you write to me, I do write back, and usually pretty quickly within a day or two. So if you try to do some of this stuff back on the job and it doesn't work out for you, please reach out to me. I don't start a taxi meter. You'll know if you're becoming annoying. I'll send you an invoice. And I've actually never done that, so moving on. Okay, let's do the things. So some keyboard shortcuts. I'm working with some pretty big lists. I was talking to somebody yesterday, helping them work on a data analysis project, and they had 700,000 lines of data. So as you can imagine, scrolling down 700,000 lines, it not only takes too much time, but eventually is an up and down and went too far, didn't go far enough, and it's that kind of a thing. So if I am at the top of a column and I want to get down to the bottom quickly, Ctrl down arrow will get me to the last non-blank cell in the column. Now, at times, if you have a blank in the middle there, it will stop, but it's okay. I'm just going to do Ctrl down arrow, and continue on my journey. So Ctrl down arrow is a quick way to jump to the bottom of a completely populated column, and it does shorten the journey for a couple, even if you have some spaces in there. So that's Ctrl down arrow, but Ctrl right arrow, Ctrl up arrow, Ctrl, right, left are always ways to get back to where you want to get to. Controls, let me address those asterisks there. If I do this again, and if you want to try this out, you certainly can if you have the workbook or any workbook. Control Shift down arrow is going to allow me to select that information. So many times, if any of you have ever applied conditional formatting, for example, and I'll do that here, if I try to apply conditional formatting and say highlight cells greater than 1,000, you notice that the column title gets formatted no matter what. And the reason we select the whole column is it's easier than click and scroll and scroll and scroll and scroll. But now, if we start at our first data item and do Control Shift down arrow and then apply formatting or conditional formatting, again, we'll just do something here, then it is only addressing the data items instead of the column title. So this addresses that problem. Control Shift down arrow, Control Shift right arrow, Control Shift left arrow. Remember, S and select, Shift and select both start with S. So if you want to select, you add the Shift key. Another cool shortcut, and I'll admit to not having these completely integrated into the way I work with Excel, but Control space and Shift space. And again, I'll give you a little cue or clue here. Control and column both begin with the C, and that's how you remember the difference. Control space selects a column, Shift space selects a row. So if you do want to select the whole column and you're not, and you want to favor the keyboard rather than the mouse, Control space will do that for you, whereas Shift space will select the entire row. It is the same as if you're clicking on your row numbers. Let me come over here. Shift space selects the whole row from wherever you are. I have seen some worksheets that you use, and they're really wide. So if I'm all the way out here in column AA, and I want to select the whole row, I mean, I can go ahead and click on 8 here, but I can also just do Shift space, and I've selected the whole row, and I can format it. One of the reasons I'm a big fan of keyboard shortcuts, and let me tell you this before I go and get my little keyboard shortcut soapbox here. If you are a mouse clicker and you are happy with that mouse clicking, I am not going to try to talk you out of that habit. I will tell you the reasons that I am a keyboard shortcut fan, and if you find that that helps you and you want to make the transition, I'll give you a couple of tips to do that. First of all, if you've met me, you know I'm not a spring chicken. So when I took typing in high school, we were on manual typewriters, and I think my teacher was still allowed to wrap our knuckles with a ruler. So we learned to type, and one of the secrets to speed is to keep your fingers on the home keys, because they put every other key in close proximity. As soon as you take your hands off of the keyboard, remember we used to have to throw a carriage return back in the old days, you had to be very careful where you positioned your fingers back, because it's easy to accidentally put them one key over. So to the extent we could keep our fingers on the keyboards, that's how much faster and ultimately more accurate we are. That is true of keyboard shortcuts as well. So speed and accuracy are a challenge for you. Keyboard shortcuts may be a way to meet that challenge. The other reason that I'm a keyboard shortcut fan is I travel all over the country. Often I'm in coach and occasionally in the middle seat, and I'm telling you, you're not using a mouse, not even one of those little touchpad mice, where you can, kind of move your finger around on a touchpad. I call it T-Rex typing. If you think about a T-Rex with their little arms, that's kind of how you are in the middle seat in coach. Without keyboard shortcuts, I'm not getting anything done. So there's my soapbox. I'm now getting off my little soapbox. I would say if you want to give it a try, 2 and 3 shortcuts. It's the whole row, Stephen, the entire row. So it's as if you were clicking on this, the 5. If you just want to select the data, that would be Control-Shift right arrow, and that's just selecting that data, that range. This Control-Space is, Shift-Space is actually selecting the entire column all the way out to the right. Okay. So that's my little soapbox on keyboard shortcuts. My method for learning these is 3 or 4 at a time as you pick up shortcuts that you like. If you like any of the ones you're seeing today, highlight them, star them, jot them on a Post-it note, stick the Post-it note on the monitor somewhere, and start incorporating them 3 or 4 at a time into the way you work. When you have those down, put up 3 or 4 more. Usually it's a couple of weeks. Okay, next one, set of shortcuts, and I think these are all on one page in your handout. Wherever you are in the row, pressing the home key will get you to column A, or whatever the first visible column is in case you've hidden column A. So if I'm way out here somewhere on column BB and I tap the home key, H-O-M-E, home key, it's going to bring me in that same row back to column A. So it's easier to get back to column A than mousing or hanging on that arrow key. Just press the home key. And end does not do what you think it will. End does not get you to the end of the row. I would say try Control right arrow for that one. But home key will always get you to the beginning no matter what of the row that you're in. F2 is a time-honored shortcut of putting something in edit mode. So if I wanted to edit this amount from 0 to something else, I can either double-click in it, I can click up here to the formula bar, or I can just hit my F2 key and type something in. So F2 is a substitute for a double click or a click up into the formula bar to input data or edit data in a cell. Notice, by the way, for those of you who are attempting to work along with me, I want you to get whatever version of Excel that you may be looking at this in. I want you to make sure that you're on the Home tab up here. Let me see if I can magnify that for you. The Home tab, we want to be on the very first one. And I want you to press your F2 key or double click in the cell, either way, and look at your ribbon. Many of those buttons are now grayed out. They are grayed out. When you are in edit mode, you can't type up there. The reason I point that out, some of you are going, well, yeah, duh. The reason I point that out is so many times in teaching an Excel class, I ask people to click on a button. They go, I can't click on the button, it's grayed out. And my first question to them is, are you in edit mode? Many times that is the reason why you can't do the next thing, is because that cell's in edit mode. All right, little side bonus there, so that's what F2 will do. This next shortcut I actually discovered by accident. So some of you may be macro folks. You like to create macros. If you are, you know that you can assign them a keyboard shortcut, and it's usually best to insert Shift in between Control and whatever letter you're going to use so that you don't overwrite an existing shortcut like Control C or Control V, which is copy and paste. So I was about ready to assign Control-Shift-L to a macro and started adopting the step to come back out and try the shortcut out to see what it did first before assigning it. And that's how I discovered that if you hit Control-Shift-L from anywhere inside a contiguous set of data, Control-Shift-L turns filter on. If you've never used filter, it's a very cool tool that allows you just to see the data that you are interested in reviewing rather than the entire data set. So it essentially hides the rows that you don't want to look at. So that's what filter does. So Control-Shift-L is how I set and clear filters. I don't bother going back to, although I did it in this case, I don't bother going back usually to clear filters. So let me do another filter here. So if I filter something and I want to clear that so I can filter something else, I just do Control-Shift-L, Control-Shift-L. Control-Shift-L turns off filter and brings everything back, and then Control-Shift-L puts those arrows back at the top. Another handy shortcut that I like to use is Control-G for Go To. So if you're looking at a formula and it says I'm using something in cell M172, and it's like, well, where the heck is that? Control-G, M172 will take you to that cell. Now you'll notice you also see that up here in the name box. So you can even use the name box to navigate around too if you don't mind the click. So I'm going to navigate to cell B2 and press enter, and it takes me to B2. So if you're trying to analyze, break down, reverse engineer, troubleshoot formulas, for example, and you see that a formula is referencing a cell in some, remote part of the workbook, just know you can go to the name box, or you can use Control-G, type in the cell reference. We'll go to L272, making stuff up here, and it takes me to L272, that you can just use Control-G to get around. Alt plus, and if you are working with me today, I'm going to jump over to 2016 where I think I'm going to spend most of my time. Will it hide and unhide rows and columns? I assume you're talking about Ctrl-Shift-L. If the rows are hidden by a filter, well, let's test that here. I like that question. Let me go ahead and shade this yellow. Then I'm going to hide it. And now I'm going to filter for BOLID and see if that A comes back. So BOL, it's not even showing because it's hidden. Okay. So then if I do Control-Shift-L, it does not come back. 7, 8, 9. Nope, does not come back. So great question. When you put search, let me take a look at that. When you put search on a specific cell, if you have a K column hidden for a % calculation, you search, it will unhide the column. No. No, it won't unhide a column, and clearly not a row either, Erica, as I just learned. You guys are going to make me smarter than I actually am. It doesn't unhide columns or rows. Filter or unfilter, it will not hide anything that you have unhide anything that you have specifically hidden, and it won't do it for columns either. So, good deal. Thank you, Erica, for your question. All right, Alt plus. All right. So if you are working along with me, we're going to add a column to this navigation worksheet tab. I'm going to go to the very end here. I'm going to type the word total in column G. If you want to do that along with me, if you're working along with me, you can. If you're listening to this later on a recording, go ahead and go into G1 and type the word total. Now what I want to do is I want to add up all the values from quarter 1 through quarter 4. And just in case this is confusing, those dashes are zeros. If I clear the formatting here, you'll see that the dashes are actually zeros. So this is just a counting format, and that's how that looks. Now, if I want to, I can type in equal sum, or I can go up to my auto sum icon, or I can use the shortcut Alt equals. Alt equal types in sum, opens the parentheses, and attempts to identify the range that you want to sum. Now, as you can see, let me do that again. Alt equal. So as you can see, it gave me C2 through F2. Had it found any values above it first, it would have tried to give me that range. But when it looked above it, all it could see was the word total, so it's like, well, you must not mean anything there. Let me go look to the left. And that's how it came up with C2 through F2. So there's one way to get a sum function in, and then here's another shortcut we're going to visit in just a second, is to double-click on the autofill handle to get the formula to copy down to the last non-blank row. Remember Control down arrow where we started? That's what it uses as its boundary. So if I do a double-click on the autofill handle, and I'm also going to double-click on the right edge to right-size it, it stopped where my data stopped. So let's take a look at that one. The autofill handle, and this is really, to me, one of the biggest parts of the missing manual idea. This is where this idea first came to me. The one thing that they don't necessarily teach us in Excel class is what our cursor is supposed to look like. So when I said click on the autofill handle, our cursor changes to a plus. Now you guys do this intuitively. If I say copy this down, let me come back here. If I say copy this down, you would grab that autofill handle, you would wait for your cursor to change to a plus, and you would click and drag down. That's how you would normally do it. With this shortcut, you're still waiting for your cursor to look like that black plus, and you're double clicking. I'm going to try to, I don't think it's going to work really well, but let me try anyway. Make this a little bigger, and it doesn't really. But if you take a look at my cursor going over the autofill handle and turning to a black plus, if I inhale deeply, hiccup, or just shift in my seat, it turns to a four-headed black arrow. That four-headed black arrow on the right means move. which is why sometimes when you're trying to autofill, you end up accidentally moving the data in that cell to a different location. So getting your cursor over the autofill handle and looking for it as a black plus also means keeping it that way so it doesn't change into a four-headed black arrow. And of course, if you just want to select data, you're looking for your cursor to look like a white plus. Many people get confused between what they need to do to select and what they need to do to copy. If you want to just select, that white plus is fine. If you want to copy, you need that black plus to copy. So again, just a little bit of that missing manual stuff that people didn't necessarily learn in class. That's what your cursors are. That's the three looks for your cursor. The fourth look for your cursor is actually when you're in edit mode. Kim, the answer is not that I know of, but if you'll do me a favor, bookmark that on your own notes. I may see if I can find something later on that one, but I don't think so. I may have a better idea, though. Okay, so when you double-click, you'll also get a blinking cursor, and that is the other way that your cursor can look in Excel. It looks like an I bar or a blinking cursor. So that's what the cursor can look like. We talked about the double-click shortcut. Let's look at autofill options, and I'm going to jump over to the second tab here and take a look at autofill options. So if you want to try it here, Alt equal and double click. That's a nice easy example to examine that double click. But here's some other things we can do, and I'm just going to kind of come over here to the right with autofill. Let's do days of the week. So I'm going to do abbreviated Monday. That will allow you the 7 days of the week, unless you click, I don't know the Mac shortcut for Alt equal, but again, hang on to that one till the end, bookmark it for yourself to make sure that I cover that or at least address that after the program. So autofill, let me go ahead and do a fill weekdays. So even though I copied Monday down 7 days and it went to Sunday, I can create a schedule that is just using weekdays by doing fill weekdays. And what's really cool about that, and this can help some of you when you're trying to track work schedules, if your crews are working Monday through Friday and not Saturday, let's take a date this week. So today's 9/8/7. So let's take 11/7. 2016, that's Monday, and I'm going to go ahead and take that down 2 weeks worth. Do that one more time. And say fill weekdays. You can see that it actually eliminated my weekend days. And I'm going to go ahead and make this long date just so you can see how that works, Monday through Friday. So you can definitely do that. Other autofills, months, certainly. I'm going to type in fully spelled out January in lowercase. You can see that you can get your months of the year. It will respect any case and abbreviation that you choose to use with months and days. Here's a little interesting one that people have always struggled with. If I put in a 1, now these are lovely, I'm so glad they increment, but if I put in a 1, by default it's just going to give me a bunch of 1s. This little guy here, this little autofill options box, this is the thing I've been clicking on to get weekdays. If I click there, you can see I have the option of filling the series. That will give me 1 through 7. The old school way to do that is to type in a 1 and a 2 and then autofill those down. I'll go ahead and straighten out the formatting here so it's all in a row. There we go. So you can just put in the interval and then select those 2 cells and double click down to wherever you want it to fill. So a couple of autofill options. There are more. For example, if you're doing quarterlies, if I type in just rankings, it will give me consecutive rankings. But if I type in first quarter, either across or down, it will stop. Let me see if I can make this a little bigger and come off to the right here. It will stop at the fourth quarter, so it recognizes there can only be 4 quarters. So there's some autofill functionality built behind the scenes for Excel. Another way that you can do autofill is with the shortcuts Ctrl-D and Ctrl-R. I think this will probably matter most, although almost everybody can probably find a use for it somewhere or the other, will come most useful to those people who are entering data which might repeat, such as accounting data or contact data. So for example, when I go to a conference, I'll walk back with a chunk of business cards. I sort them by city and state, so that if I'm going to, let's say, a conference is in Washington, D.C., I'm probably going to get a lot of cards from Baltimore, Maryland. Well, if I know I've got 10 cards from Baltimore, I can just select Baltimore 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 cells and do Control-D, and Control-D fills down. Control-D fills down. If I wanted to put in other duplicating information to the right, let's say I had some questions up here and the answers were on a scale of 1 to 5. So let's put in question A. Whoops, didn't want to do that. Question A and question B, question C. If the answer is the same, I can select those 3 and do Control-R, and that will fill to the right. So Control-D fills down, Control-R fills to the right. Now, a while back, let me see if I can identify quickly who, but I may not remember, about autofilling across. Let's see. Autofill for a row. That was Kim's question. So rather than autofilling for a row, what I might do is select a bunch of cells and do Control-R, and that will fill that value across. If it's a formula, it should do the relative cell referencing. If you do Control-R and it's A1 plus B1, it will be B1 plus D1, C1 plus D1, and so on and so forth. So it'll adjust for it. So there's kind of another way to do that rather than autofill. You can definitely click and drag, but there's no double click thing there. But Control-R might be a way to make that a little bit easier. Okay, so that is kind of the most of the keyboard shortcuts. We'll wrap up with a couple of ones that I've been using periodically in here, and that is to double click to right size a column. So let me come back to navigating just for a moment and do Control Home and get this down to a smaller zoom here. So as you start to, as your columns get too narrow, I'm not, but feel free to tell me in chat how you use F4, and I'll bring that up during the break. So what I do here to right size it is I simply select all of the columns and then double click between any 2 to right size the columns. Now when I say right size, I'm making an emphasis. It does not make them equally sized. It right sizes them for the content. If they needed to be equally sized, you would need to select all of the columns that you want to be of equal size and take the biggest one, I think it's probably going to be one of these, and click and drag it over just a little bit, one column. Now they're all the same size. So that is the kind of trick to getting them all the same size, is to select them all in size 1. If you want to right size them, make the columns wide enough to get the data, double clicking. Now, I see a lot of folks doing multiple row column titles. In fact, I worked with one of your cohorts a while back, and part of the problem we were facing is we had multiple row column titles, and that can be problematic for filtering. It can be problematic for pivot tables. It's just a problem. So one way we get around that is to keep a single row column title and use a hard line break inside of a cell to get a second line. Let me illustrate. So let me come back in my beginning here to autofill. So let's say I had, and I wouldn't do this along with me, but if I had this as January 2000 and February 2000, if that's how I kind of wanted to see that information, I don't need to put it on 2 rows. What I can do instead is in this cell, without having to worry about, messing around with the size of it to get it in the right place, is Alt-Enter. Alt-Enter gives me a second line inside that single cell. Alt-Enter. And now I have a single row column title, which is necessary for pivot tables and charts and a bunch of other things. And I was able to get to 2 lines. So Alt-Enter is a way to get a hard line break inside of a cell. And I'm going to cover this last, I believe this last topic here, Alternative Merge Center. I'm going to go ahead and check and review all the Q&A and see if we got to the questions so far. Merge and Center. I have a rant about Merge and Center. I'm going to try to abbreviate it for you. Don't use Merge and Center. Merge and Center, as I like to say, disturbs the matrix. Excel is a grid system, and there's ways that the columns and rows work for you around formulas and formatting and filtering and a lot of other great things that don't necessarily start with F. But merging cells is a bad idea. If I have had one request from my friends from Redmond when I've had a chance to talk to them, it's like, can you just take Merge and Center out of Excel because it's a bad idea. So a lot of people use it because you're used to using, this kind of a, you like this kind of a look for your reports, but you can have it without using Merge and Center. The steps are right here on the screen and in your handout, but I'm going to demonstrate those for you. So I'm going to come over to formatting here. And we'll do a double click and a double click to get everything right sized. And this cell up here on row 1 is merged and centered. And here's how you can tell. I'm down inside my, down inside my data set here. And I'm going to begin to arrow up, and you'll see the box go around the cell that I'm in. And then when I get to row 1, it turns into this giant merge cell. This is a problem when you start getting into this being down inside your workbook. You'll start to get messages like, can't do this with merge cells, can't do that with merge cells. So, solution, don't use merge cells. But if you like this look, first thing I would do is, clear the formatting so we can get it back to where it belongs, which is in A1. That's where it actually lives. But let's get that same look. I'm going to select the cells over which I want to center it. Bring the zoom down. So I've selected the cells over which I want to center it. And right here where it says Merge and Center, just below there, you see a little dialog box launcher. That's what those little arrows are called. I'm going to click on that guy. And instead of center, I'm going to choose Center Across Selection. Center Across Selection. That's what that should be. Also make sure, let me come down here, also make sure that all of your merge cells have been cleared. Make sure that you just clear your merge cells. Either use clear formatting or come in and unmerge all of your cells just by clicking until this is clear. And I'll click OK. So I have that centered look, but watch now as I line up it doesn't go to a giant cell. It just keeps it as a single cell, the grid. It just positions it in the middle of the selection. That is the center across selection. Those steps are in your handout. Make sure you clear your merge cells first, and you'll find this will make your life much easier as you go in and start working with formulas and filtering and all those other good things, subtotals that we like to use. Okay, I'm going to go in and check chat here and do a quick look. When you entered the word total, the color automatically came up. This is Diana's question on there, like the previous cell. How did you do that without having to go in and fix it? Well, Excel should recognize the formatting to the left. It won't recognize the formatting to the right. So let me do this. I'm going to clear the formatting on this guy. Clear format, so it's back to normal. I'm going to format these cells with, I don't know, cell style. We'll just use blue here. And if I type in total, it adopts the same formatting. I didn't do anything for that. It just did it automatically. But if I insert another column here and let's say make it index number, it does not adopt the formatting. So it should be doing it automatically. If for any reason it doesn't, so if you type it in because at some point you said don't automatically adopt formatting or you have that set as an option, you can always come here to your little paintbrush. Oops. So while you are on a cell that has the formatting you like, hit that paintbrush and then click on the cell that has it. And that should take care of that one. So it should happen automatically. Occasionally that gets turned off when you've made the choice to not do that once. If you've clicked on the little lightning bolt and say don't copy formatting, sometimes it just kind of sticks that way. Let's see, what else do I have here? How do you right size text within a cell? So in other words, make the cell fit. There is actually a way to do that. Let me see. Yep, there's a way to do that. Let me make this big. If I go to alignment, shrink to fit. So it is shrink to fit. That was for Seattle DLRG. That was your question, and it is on the same place we went for that center across selection and to unmerge cells. It is called shrink to fit. Great question. Now F4, now I'm very curious what F4 does, so I'm just going to press it. And F4 doesn't seem to do anything on mine. Let me make sure I'm actually pressing F4 here. What if I do F4 here or F4 here? So for WSP, PB Seattle University, come back and tell me F4. If you're talking about F4 for absolute cell references, yes, we're going to cover that. Got it. We're going to do that when we get to formulas. That's it. What does F4 do? I'm not in a formula. That's why I haven't covered it. So we're definitely going to do that. All right. Alt equals shortcut for Max. Let me get back to you on that one. If you would, this is Weinstein or Weinstein, A and U. If you would, write to me after the program. And when I respond to you, I'll also respond to Carrie and Judy. And if they want to post this somewhere on your sites, they can. And I'll get back to you with that question on a Mac. All right, got that one. Got that one. Okay, column hidden. Okay, so now I think, Erica, as I'm looking at your question again, if I've hidden this, let me see. So if I've hidden this column and I do a find on wit C, so interestingly enough, it thinks it's found it, but it's leaving you kind of in the in-between. So it technically finds it, and since you can't see me, you can't see that I'm throwing air quotes around the word find. So it's not actually showing it to you, but it has actually found it. And if you look up in the column title, you can see that that's actually there. So even though it's a little line here, it is showing you that value. So it will show you that it won't unhide the column technically, but it will show it to you in the formula bar. Sorry, I misread that question earlier, but I think that's the one that you were interested in. All right, let me poll for some questions. Yes, thank you. Let me poll for some questions here and see how we're doing. Any other questions before we move on? All right. Let me get to everyone here just in case I type answers in. Okay, very good. And we're walking. Okay. To repeat the last action, Control Y. Carrie, the shortcut to repeating the last action is Control Y. I also like to call that one undoing my undo. If you do an undo and you change your mind about what you've just undone, you can do Control Y and then it becomes a redo. So Control Z is undo, Control Y is redo, or do what I just did. Okay. /fill, since I have so many of you that are working in 2013, I wanted to introduce 2013 and beyond. I wanted to introduce you to /fill. If you're using 2010 or an older Mac version, I don't even know if the newer Mac versions have /fill if you're using Mac 2016, but I know that 2011 doesn't have it. Yeah, 2011 doesn't have it. So /fill, what does it do? So I'm going to come out here to my /fill tab. It's the blue tab if you're in the workbook with me. Let me go up here, make this a little bit bigger so we can see what we're doing. So I'm going to come out here to Sir Rodney Scones. This is a, let's say we've imported some information from another system and it brought it all into column A. And what I really want to do is see this information separately. Now some of you are familiar with the text to columns thing. Well, we could do a text to columns here and separate out the 3-digit number with the rest of it, but we can't use a real good delimiter because we've got spaces and those spaces aren't consistently used. So here's what /fill will allow you to do. I'm going to type in 202, oops, getting unlocked back on. I'm going to type in 202, and then I'm going to type in the first digit of the second one, and what you may notice is in the gray, it's given me all of the rest of the values. I'm just going to hit my tab key, and it has filled them all in. Even this one would have given us a problem because of the 3 digits and 4 digits. Okay, so in case you missed that, I'm going to do it with the product name now, Sir Rodney's Scones. So I typed in the first full one, and now I'm just going to type in the first letter of the next one, and I'm taking it tab or enter, and it will fill in the rest of them. Now this is /fill. It was introduced in 2013. I'm going to complete this with KOENE. And what was the other one? Let's see. GREAL, so G, and there it is, and it gave me everything else. So with just a few keystrokes, I can do what I used to have to do with text to columns, and it's called /fill. It's available in versions 2013 and 2016 right now. In the desktop version, I don't know that it is in the online version of Excel, but it certainly is in the desktop version of Excel. The gotchas are a moving target. One of the gotchas is don't completely type in the second instance. Sometimes if you complete that second instance, /fill goes away. So let me delete this. And I'll just do the last one, KOENE, If I continue to type in EAL, do you notice that my list goes away? So you have to kind of be careful with that one. It doesn't, so where to end the second one. It shouldn't matter. Let's go find out. Let's go take, let's delete this column so we clear the flash fill functionality here, and let's do this one in lowercase. And let's put this last one in proper case. Let's see what it does. If I type in KOENE and G, it still finds it. Now here's the fallout. It's going to leave them all in lowercase, so that's just the fallout. So yes, it'll still work. It's not dependent on case. It's dependent on how much it can tell. It's not foolproof, by the way. It's going to do the best it can. As you can see in something like this, Camembert Puro chops, if that made any sense in the food world, you could assume that that's one whole thing. But since it knows we're asking for that last word, it's going to try to use some algorithm to see what we want to pull out in flash fill. It's also up there on your ribbon in the Data Tools group. So the trick is don't complete the second instance, and that will get you to your flash fill. Another really cool trick in the wonderful world of copying and pasting is copy, paste, transpose. This may look familiar to you, except slightly turned around. This is a partial data set, but the products are across the top. So we're thinking, boy, if we could just twist this around. Well, we can. I'm going to do Control-Shift down arrow, right arrow to select it. You could also do Control-A, same thing. And I'm going to copy it. Now the thing about transpose is you have to paste it in a brand new location. You cannot do it over itself. It is this button. It's this button, or you can do paste special and choose transpose, either way, and it will lay it across. So let me come back to my copy, paste, transpose here. Not sure what happened. Let's see. Let me come back here, copy, paste, transpose. Every now and then. Let me jump over here to 2010. I'm not sure why that's giving me a hard time. Okay, copy, paste, transpose. And it turns that whole thing around. I'm going to left justify everything. And now I have that whole thing basically just spun around. I'll tell you what this is really useful for. If you've ever copied out a bunch of email addresses and managed to get them using data text to columns burst across, so me@you.com, we'll just leave that, and you@me.com, and her@her.com. So if I got all these email addresses out, I could do a copy, paste, transpose, and now I have a list. So that's where that becomes really useful. So transpose is something that's been around forever, but for most of us, transpose would be a bad thing. 36 inches as a measurement is not 63 inches, and that's how we think of transpose. How Excel thinks of transpose is to take a column and put it in a row, and a row and put it in a column. If using the equal right and number of characters, it will grab less than the designated number. It will never grab less than the designated number, but you have to watch out for things like trailing spaces with equal right. So you have to watch out for things like trailing spaces. We're not specifically covering text functions in this program, but if during Q&A you have questions like that, please shoot them out to me. So that is transpose. And carry 3 characters, but the formula is for 5. It's actually going to pull 5. That's the answer. It will pull 5. It will count back and look for 5. If it doesn't find 5, it'll only give you the 3. But don't forget, that's in the entire cell. So we can experiment with that at the end in Q&A. A couple of times I've gone in to use clear formatting. Since I've been in 2013 a bunch, Clear formatting actually looks like this little pink eraser guy. Hang on, what did I do here? I don't know what has gone wrong here. Let me come over. May just be the portal. Nope, it really isn't going to let me do that. So this little pink button is erase if I go, or clear format. If I go over to 2010, that is a little white button. So they changed the appearance, but the location is the same. And it will clear formatting. It will clear conditional formatting. I say conditional formatting is a matter of taste. Sometimes we inherit a workbook. Somebody has put some conditional formatting in there and we don't get it. Clear formatting will get rid of those too. But one of my favorite uses for this button is when we occasionally get that date problem. So when you have dates in multiple formats in here. If I use clear formats, it's immediately going to go to the serial number date format. If you're not familiar with that, that's what that is. Date number 1 is January 1, 1900. And 42,678 days later, it's November 4th. So clear formats, and then choose your date format. We'll make it all short date. So that's the antidote to the date problem. Dates have become a little easier to work with in the later versions of Excel. You should just be able to select the column and change the date format. But occasionally the formatting on that gets stubborn. So clearing formatting is a good one to know. Be very careful. Don't do clear all because it does exactly that. It does a clear all. All right. So great for date and time math, clears conditional formatting too. It does turn dates into serial numbers, but don't panic. You have the right data. It just needs to be in the right format. So that's the two-step date fix. So text and value formatted data. Yes. So as I look at this one, at a quick glance, this all looks like I have the same information in the same cell, but if I do a clear format on this, you'll notice that some goes to the right and some goes to the left. These are formatted as text. If I click in here, these are actually formatted as text. And this one, oops, this one is formatted as a number. So that clear formats is also a way, as we get to VLOOKUP, you'll see where that might be useful. If you're trying to sort things and things aren't sorting right, it's like, what's the problem? Clear the formats, because sometimes even if it looks like all numbers, it's really not all numbers. So clear formatting can help you there as well. Earlier when I was asked a question about how did that new column total automatically adapt the cell style, I went in and quickly formatted that header row a certain way, and what I used was the cell styles gallery. So coming here into formatting, if I wanted to format these 3 cells a certain way and I was having trouble making decisions, cell styles will work within the theme that is being used and allow me to select particular colors and formats within that theme. Also gets me some highlight colors here that I can use to set data apart. Telephone numbers, by the way, are done here in special formats. If you do phone number, you're going to get a special format that will allow a phone number. Again, hold that one until the end, and we'll show you how to do that. But there is a special format, and that's how you go about doing phone numbers. There is a way for you to work with different types of formats and phone numbers if you want to do it differently, and we can take a look at that if that's of interest. All right. Sorry for that loud bang. I want to do a quick check and make sure, Carrie, that you can still hear me.
Yes, I can still hear you just fine. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. All right. I get excited when I talk about Excel, and sometimes I move around and throw my phone. Okay, that wasn't the idea. All right, so that's cell styles. You can make your own cell style. For example, if you always use a yellow format with red text that's italicized and bold, and that means something to you, you can go into cell styles and you can save a new cell style. And I'm going to name this one Melissa just to set it apart. And now if I want to use that again, I go to cell styles and it's right here at the top. So if there are cell styles, I know a lot of you are color coding people. So if you like to use your color codes and you're using formatting a certain way, you're going to go to cell styles and it's just get a cell the way you want it. And then with that cell selected, go to new cell style and you can save it with your own name or whatever that means. Okay. Excuse me, I didn't want to sneeze at you. Judy, I just saw your question fly by. Let me go look at it again, show where it showed at the top again. You bet. On the Home tab, it's in the Styles group to the right of Conditional Formatting and Format as a Table. It is right there. If you are in 2010, it is in the same location. Again, to the right of Conditional Formatting and Format as a Table, you'll see Cell Styles there, and that's where you can do your new cell style selection. Okay, so there's that. All right, big shift now. So we've talked about shortcuts, we've talked about some formatting tips and tricks, things that should make your life a little easier and faster and more accurate working inside of Excel. Now we're going to make a big shift over to formulas. Now here's the thing about formulas. Most of us just do this by trial and error until we learn how they work. But this is the one thing, how you change that. Let me quickly get that question before we leave this topic from my Seattle University folks. Some versions of Excel have different options and styles in Home section. I suspect you have to edit the ribbon to get to it. If you don't see cell styles, you might have a different arrangement of buttons, and that may be a custom ribbon. If you're talking about what you can actually choose here, that is determined by the theme. So if I choose a different theme, I will see different colors in here. So hopefully you see cell styles. If you don't, what I would ask for you folks at Seattle University, shoot me a screenshot. And let me do this. Shoot me a screenshot and let me see what yours look like and see if I can make sense of why it would do that. Okay, on to formulas. So many of you, when you went to school and you learned about math and how to do math, you learned the order of operations, and you may have learned it as PEMDAS, or please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, which stands for parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division, addition, and subtraction. This is the order of operation. Why that's important to know is many of us came to Excel and we understood that math was done on a pocket calculator. So let's take these formulas for example. I've got 3 different versions of the same formula typed out here, and I'm going to retype them. These are in text so you can see them. Actually, I see what's going on. I have to go clear my formats here. So here are the answers to those 3. The first 2 both total to 65, and the last one totals at 110. Now let me go ahead and hide these 2 for a minute. If I just put this one up on the screen and say, what's the answer? Many of you are going to tell me it's 110. And what you're doing is pocket calculator math. You're doing 5 plus 6, which pocket calculators do 2 math operations at one math operation at a time. So a pocket calculator is going to say 5 plus 6 is 11, and then it's going to take that result and say times 10 is 110. But Excel is computing this entire formula, and it's using real math. So multiplication comes before division. multiplication comes before addition. So it's doing 6 times 10, which is 60, and then it's adding the 5. Let's take a look at these other guys. This is also 65. Now, this is actually what it did. It did the 6 times 10, and then it added the 5. Now, I didn't need these parentheses, but I will tell you, if you're new to composing your own formulas, it's not a bad idea to put parentheses around logical groups of things in your formula so that if you needed to, you could explain it to somebody else. This is actually how you troubleshoot an order of operations problem, because if you put those parentheses in, it will explain it to you. So for example, in this last one, if what I really was expecting was 110, because you guys are smarter than the software, never forget that. You're smarter than the software. You know the ballpark of the answer that you're looking for in a formula. And if 65 is not in the ballpark, you say, well, here's what I really wanted. I wanted to take a 5 item and a 6 item and compute 10 of them. That's different. That's 5 plus 6 in parentheses times 10, and that got you your 110. So the thing about order of operations, Excel is going to compute all formulas in this order, period. That's what it's going to do, and this is what those symbols look like, by the way. It's going to compute all of these in this order. So if you ever put in a formula and you get an answer you just don't buy, try going in there and just putting parentheses around logical groups of things. All right, very good. Okay, so try parentheses first. When it comes to order of operations, trust that you know what the ballpark is and put parentheses around logical groups of things to troubleshoot it. All right, now another piece of the missing manual that many of us didn't get was the difference between absolute cell references and relative cell references. A relative cell reference is relative cell referencing, which is the default way in which Excel works, is why when you copy a formula down, it's A1 plus B1, and you copy it down, it becomes A2 plus B2 or C2 plus, or A2 plus B2, A3 plus B3. That's relative cell referencing. Sometimes we don't want that cell to increment, and what we need to do is create an absolute cell reference. Let's take a look at that. You may have seen dollar signs on that one. So let's take this little worksheet. This is a green tab there that says absolute cell references. If we want to compute the tax on each of these prices, we might say, well, we'll do equal price times tax. That seems pretty logical. When we press enter, that is indeed the answer. So we might just say, and all we need to do then is copy it down. And as you can see, we get 0 here and a value error here. Here's the reason why that is. Make this a little smaller here. Okay, so when we copied the formula down by doing our little double click, indeed it did take B4, B5, and B6 for the price. That's what we wanted. But it also moved our tax rate theoretically. C1 was correct, but when we copied it down, it became C2 and C3. So what we need to do is when we're writing this formula, somebody mentioned F4 earlier, you're going to get dollar signs around the column and row. Now you can type those dollar signs in, that's not a problem. And if I type those dollar signs in, what I've done is I've anchored the column and the row so that it doesn't change. You can see when I did that, it left C1 alone. Now another way to do that is to get your cursor somewhere around that cell reference and press your F4 key. F4 in one keystroke will put the dollar signs around the column and the row, and then again copy that down, and now your results are correct because it anchored this cell in place so that when you copy it, it doesn't move. That's what an absolute cell reference means. So I want you to think about it in terms of that dollar sign, which to most of us means currency, think of that $sign as an anchor with a rope running through it. It is anchoring that part of the formula in place. Now, what a lot of people don't know about F4 is it has several settings. It has several options. It is a toggle. So as I continue to press F4, it locks only the row, only the column, and turns it off. So F4 has 4 settings: off, both, just the row, and just the column. So just be aware of that, because if you accidentally hit it twice, you may get some unexpected results. So that's an absolute cell reference. When you are working across workbooks, for those of you who are building formulas across workbooks, by default, it will make that an absolute cell reference. You don't have to keep it that way, but it will do that by default. It will make it an absolute. Now, I've done this a couple of times in the last minute or so. I've shown you all of the formulas so that you could see what happened. And I did that with the shortcut Control, technically it's Control Grave or Control Grav. It's this little backward tick mark, but I always teach it as Control tilde. So for those of you that are in front of a keyboard, take a look down at your keyboard. For most of you, this will be to the left of your number 1 key. To the left of your number 1 key, you see that tilde there. Some of you call it a tilde. So a gentleman in Tulsa used to call it a Matilda key. But Control and that key, so let me go back here, Control and that key reveal all your formulas. You will also find a button on the ribbon called Show Formulas, and it does the same thing. A lot of people had trouble figuring out what that shortcut was they were talking about. You can see the little backward tick mark there. That is what that mark is on the tilde key. And to get it back to normal, you just do that same shortcut again. I strongly recommend when you inherit a workbook from somebody else, before you do anything on the worksheet, and you can be clicked anywhere, it doesn't matter where you're clicked, and hit Control tilde so you can see where all the formulas are. I have at times, especially, in fact, I did it the other day when I was helping a client, I did Control tilde, I highlighted all the cells that had a formula, and I highlighted them a particular color, so that when I did Control tilde again, everything that was yellow I knew had a formula in it. Because just like this, without looking in the cell, you're not necessarily sure whether that's just a value or it's a formula. Sure, if you click in each cell, you could tell. But if I do Control tilde, I can see them all. This little technique I like to call marking the minefield. Some of you probably don't do it anymore, but may have at some point in your career deleted somebody's 9.5-foot if statement and then had to go back to them to have them put it back in. It's not an easy ask, and if you ever find yourself in that situation, bring food. Because I can promise you, as somebody who writes some monster formulas, I had a good day. The day that I could write that 9.5-foot statement, if statement, it was a good day. I'm not getting that day back. So marking the minefield when you're using a workbook from somebody else is a great way to kind of prevent you from just accidentally or inadvertently deleting really, really big formulas. I want to take a short ask here for questions. Let me go back. The icon on the ribbon is different. Okay, got that one. Very good. And I think we answered those questions. If we didn't, by the way, if you have any other questions, let's get those into chat around just basic formulas, because we're about to move into if and VLOOKUP. And my hope as we cover if and VLOOKUP is not only to understand what if and VLOOKUP do, but to give you kind of a method of how to break down and learn new functions. That's really, really important, how to break down and learn new functions. Okay. I don't see anything new, so let's take a deep breath and a little bit of a stretch and look somewhere else for a minute. If you're at your desk taking this course, make sure you are not hunched over your computer. There is a position, my husband calls it vulching. That's when you're kind of hunched over and squinting at your screen. interestingly enough, from a biological level, what you're actually doing when you're hunching over your screen is cutting blood flow to your brain. So I think it's always good to keep as much oxygen flowing to the brain when you're in Excel as possible. All right, a little bit of a break. Hey, take a quick check. Go back to that first page and look at those things that you wanted to cover. In fact, I'm going to come back here in the chat and roll to the beginning and see what we have here. Let's see. Pivot tables and VLOOKUP, think like a formula. Hopefully we got to that one. All right, very good. All right, moving on. If, by itself, if I had to pick one function and say I can't live without the function, it would be the if function. The way I like to break down if this is true, then this, otherwise this. The first comma says then, and the second comma says otherwise. So when I learn a function like if, I try to put it in terms that make sense to me. I was explaining if to somebody else yesterday, as a matter of fact. And I said, okay, if I'm going to go to the hamburger place and I want a particular kind of a hamburger, like a double cheeseburger, and I'm hungry now that I've just said that, and it costs $5, and I have $5, then I can buy it. If it's over $5 and I only have $5, I can't buy it. So let's break that down into an if statement. If the price on the cheeseburger is greater than $5, then can't buy it. Otherwise, buy it. Now, though we may not say the sentence like that, that's how an if statement breaks down. It breaks down pretty much into an English language sentence. So coming back to my workbook here, we have a couple of worksheets off to the right. One of them is called if. So the formula that we're going to try to create is if the fourth quarter is 0, then I want to find the biggest value between quarter 1 and quarter 4. So for example, if they didn't buy anything in quarter 4, what's the biggest value they bought all year? And in this case, it would be 702. In this case, 0 in quarter 4, but the biggest value they had, the biggest quarter was second quarter, so 1560. So that's what I want to do. If this is 0, if quarter 4 is a 0, then give me the biggest number in the rest of the quarters. Otherwise, just use whatever's in fourth quarter. That's the if statement we're about to write. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger here. These days, many of you have already figured out, if you type in the function and hit your tab key, it will open up the parentheses for you. And all it has to do is recognize it somewhere in the list, hit tab, and it will complete the function and open it up for you. So equal if, whoops, equal if tab. So if this, F2, is equal to 0, then, so I'm saying then and typing a comma because the first comma says then. If F2 is equal to 0, then find me the biggest or the max of all of these, whoops, all of these values here. Find me the biggest one. If this is true, then this. Now I didn't put an otherwise in. So if it's 0, because what would happen then, I'm just going to do a Control D here, without putting an otherwise in, this just comes up to false. So if this is true, then this, otherwise we're not telling it otherwise. So otherwise, use quarter 4. Let me roll that out just a bit. If F2 equals 0, then find me the largest number in the range C2 through F2. Otherwise, if it doesn't equal 0, then just give me whatever's in F2. Now when I copy that down, because I've specified an otherwise, this now will be that 1170. If this is true, then this, otherwise this. And I'm explaining it, and I'm clicking through this down here. I'm clicking through this down here. These are live. These little things are live here. You can click through them to kind of check the syntax on a function. The other thing you can do is if you're not sure what the function does, you can always click on the function. That is also live, and it will explain that function to you. So don't forget, when you're looking at a function, you can click on anything that pops up as a blue link for help in breaking down that function. Let me look at that question again. I just saw a question pop up. What if you had a number in F2 to begin with? Well, we actually do have a number in F2 to begin with. In this case, it's 0, and in this case, it's 1170. So understand, here's what my if is saying. If F2 is 0, then find me the max. Otherwise, put whatever value is in F2. So that's how that one. Don't forget, these dashes are actually 0, so there is a value in there. Okay. So if this is true, then this, otherwise this, and your otherwise can be another if. So let's say we asked if F2 is 0, and then find me the max, otherwise give me F2. Well, what if F2 is a blank? Let's see what it did if we were to delete this. So it's interpreting F2 as blank as 0, but let's just say nothing. Let's put in the word nothing. So if F2 is 0, well, nothing is 0, then find me the max, otherwise whatever's in F2. So this really isn't giving us what we need. So we can say if F2 is equal to 0, then this, otherwise if F2 is equal to the word nothing, then max, making this more complicated than it needs to be, F2, otherwise F2. See how that, there we go. Okay, so let's break down this monstrosity I just typed in. If F2 equals 0, then find me the max. Well, it doesn't equal 0, it says nothing. So otherwise, and here's another if statement, if F2 equals the word nothing, then find me the max. Again, the max C2 F2. And if that's not true, then give me the value as false. So this is big. If this is true, then this, otherwise this. Okay? If this is true, then this, otherwise this. I guarantee you, if you bring me a workbook that you need help with, let me come back to my slides here. If you bring me a workbook that you need help with, this is exactly what I'm saying, and I usually work alone in my office, so I can say things out loud to nobody in the ear. But I am saying, if this is true, then this, otherwise this. If this is true, then this, otherwise this. You can have almost, used to be, was it 9 arguments per parentheses and however many math operators, but the cell became 6,384 characters big, so you can pretty much have almost as big a formula as you want, and multiple nested if statements. If this is true, then this, otherwise this. If this is true, then this, otherwise this. Notice at the end, the parentheses must always be black. If you are typing in a formula, your parentheses happens to have, your ending parentheses is a color, it means you have not balanced your parentheses. So that closing one should always be black. Show you a neat trick that a student showed me about 10 years ago. What I'm going to do on my keyboard is hit my left arrow key. I want you to watch this parenthesis, the black, the open parentheses, and my final close parentheses. Just keep your eyes on those for a moment. And I'm going to use my left arrow key. I don't know if you noticed, but they momentarily bolded. If you continue that, let's watch the 2 red parentheses. these two momentarily bold. And if you go in, the purple one's momentarily bold. So you can use that left arrow key to notice what the parentheses are actually encompassing. There is another function called if-error. If-error is kind of cool. If you use functions, let's come over here quickly to if-error. So you can see I've got some divide by 0 errors because I'm trying to take 2016 purchases divided by 2014 purchases. If I didn't have any, I've got divide by 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap this simple formula in if-error. This is 2010 and beyond. If error, whoops, if this is going to be an error, then say no purchases 2014. So instead of seeing divide by 0 where there's an error, I'm going to see the actual words no purchases 2014. I don't have to use what's left of my brain to try to remember what a divide by 0 really means. I can just put it in here. And an if-error is very simple. You're going to take your original formula and, as I said, wrap it in an if-error. It only has 2 arguments. What formula do you want it to evaluate, or what cell do you want it to evaluate? And what do you want it to be? What do you want it to say if it's going to give you an error? Now, you only want to use that for predictable errors. If you might get a pound ref or you might get a name error or something in there, then you really don't want to use it. This is for predictable error messages. Okay, let's take a look at VLOOKUP. VLOOKUP stands for vertical lookup. You've been doing vertical lookups probably since grade school. First time they took you to the library to do a report, they showed you how to go back to the index and run your little finger down the list and go over to that next column to find the page number. Well, that was a vertical lookup. And a VLOOKUP is doing exactly the same process. You know what you want to look up. Let's say you wanted to do a report on the state of Colorado and you had a book of states. You go down in the index and you look up Colorado, and then you go over to the next column and it says it's on page 72. So we knew what we wanted to look up. That was Colorado. We knew where we wanted to look it up. It was the index or the table of contents, for example. The column index number is which column had the answer. In our case, it was the next column over, or the second column. And we also knew what we were going to do if we couldn't find it. If I need to write a report on Colorado and I don't find anything on Colorado, I need to get another book. Or if I didn't commit to writing about Colorado, I could just pick another state. And there are the 2 choices with range lookup. What if I can't find it? Tell me you can't find it so I can get another book. Or get close. Just do another state. Get close without going over. So that's how a VLOOKUP is built. What, where, which, and what if. Let's go do a real simple one in here. Make this a little bigger. We've got a color table here. Color numbers 1 through 8, and the colors red through violet. And we want to know in this cell what the color name is associated with 3. If I just ask you that, you're going to tell me, oh, it's blue. And you would be correct. And here's what you did, and you did it so fast. You kind of ran your little finger down the list, found the 3, went over, and you found the word blue. Well, that's how a VLOOKUP works. I'm going to do this from the FX. So here's our little dialog box for VLOOKUP. And we're going to say, I want you to look up whatever I've typed in D2, tab. I want you to look it up in this table, and I want you to tell me what's in the second column. Now, the thing with column number is it is B, not, it is 2, not B. So it's the column index number. How many columns over from the lookup column is this? Let's just leave it at that for right now. We get blue. If we type in a 7, we're going to get black. If we type in a 1, we're going to get red, because what it's doing, it knows what we want to look up, where we want to look for it, and which column the answer is in. What, where, which. Now let's talk about the what if. Let's type in 3.1. It's going to give me blue. We don't really have a color 3.1, but it's going to give me blue. 3.9 still gives me blue. So let's take a look at our formula again. With nothing in range lookup, it's going to get close without going over to the next number, and this always refers to a numerical lookup, not an alpha one. So it got close without going over. If we put in a 0 or the word false, what we're telling it is find me this value exactly. Well, it didn't find that number exactly. It would have found 3, but it didn't find 3.1 or 3.9. So the NA, which stands for not available, is tell me you can't find it. What, where, which, and what if. What do you want to look up? Whatever I typed in D2. Where do you want to look for it? Over here in this table. Which column has the answer you want? The second one. What do you want me to do if you can't find it? 0 or false says, tell me you can't find it. Blank says, get as close as you can without going over, or the word true, get as close as you can without going over. Another really important thing you want to do here is always use an absolute cell reference or a named range. We're not covering those necessarily today, because if you don't, let's do a don't. Let's see what happens if we don't do that. We'll type a 3 here. I'm going to type a 1 here and copy this formula down. Tells me I can't find the 1. Why? Because when I copied it down, it moved my where from A2 to B9 to A3 to B10. So of course what I want to do is use my absolute cell references here, and then when I copy it, it will find the red. So don't forget, you always want to make that an absolute cell reference. If you know how to use named ranges, that's what you want to do there. Couple of gotchas, lock it with that. The lookup column has to be the first column. If it's not the first column, you can use the lookup function. So for example, I can say, so here I've got my my color number here instead of in the first column. But if I'm using just the plain old lookup function, lookup says, what do you want to look up? In what range am I going to find it? Whoops, let's actually do that correctly. I need my comma. In what range are you going to find it? And relative to where it finds it, where's the answer? And I can still get blue. So lookup is very similar. It wants to know what you want to look up, where you want to look it up, and relative to the number it finds, the position it finds it in, find that same position in this range and give me that answer. Lookup is more economical than VLOOKUP because it doesn't process the whole table. It just processes those 2 items. Be careful with leading and trailing spaces. That's kind of another gotcha. You notice here it's not finding the word yellow. Well, the word yellow here has a space. This one doesn't. This one doesn't have a space. That's why it's not finding it. So one clever trick is to use the trim function. Trim gets rid of leading and trailing spaces. So I would use trim, and then I would do a copy, paste values here. And now it finds that number 4. So trim, a really handy function to get rid of leading and trailing spaces. This is the bane of our existence when we're importing data from other systems. Let me do a quick check for questions. I'm going to pop open chat here and see if we have any questions on if or VLOOKUP. And then we're going to do our wrap up here with pivot tables. Now, because we are running up against our end time here at 2 p.m., and we've been taking questions all along and breaking here and there, if there's questions we don't get to, please write to me after the program. I think you've got my email address. If not, you hit this URL, go to the contact page, and write to me, and I will answer your questions. Okay, pivot tables. Really didn't get what those were a long time ago, but this explanation really made sense to me. If you superimpose the map of the world onto a cube rather than a ball to get a globe, every time you pivot the cube, you're looking at a different face or slice of the world. Well, that's what pivot tables do to your data. They enable you to look at a different slice of your data. This is a review, and we're going to do this real quickly. This is a review if you've never done a pivot table. The instructions are in your handout. Insert, pivot table, finish. You have to make sure you're working with a well-built list. Got to have column titles. No blank rows. No, I should say no blank. Got to have column titles, no blanks in your column title row. No completely blank columns, no completely blank rows. Those will prevent you from using pivot tables. So if you have a well-built list, you can do just insert, pivot table, finish. Now what I want you to do is think about this as your canvas, this as your paint, and these are your brushes. So we're going to create the picture or the slice that we want to see here on our canvas by using the fields on the right and arranging them in the right order. So if I want to see a report by product comparing north and south, I just click the boxes and now I have that report. So that's all a pivot table is. I know some of you were expecting it to be a lot harder, but that's really all a pivot table is. Okay? So insert pivot table, finish, check the boxes that you want to see, and off we go. And you can have multi-level subtotals, kind of we did here by product and customer. We can click and drag things around. We can put products in columns. So you're pretty free to work with this however you want to. And the right way to structure a pivot table is whichever way gives you the answer to your question. So you select your columns, you arrange your report. So that's the fundamentals. Now, how do you work with this thing once you set it up? Now, I pivot, just to give you an idea where my orientation comes from, I pivot transaction data. So I collect a lot of data about a transaction. For example, I have this webinar today. It is for SDA. It is on this topic, which includes this application. I always track my applications because Excel tends to do well fourth quarter. Track my applications, and then what the bill was and when it got billed and when it got paid, and if it's an on-site, where it was. I track all of this information, and then I pivot it so I can tell how much business I did with an organization. So I can tell which cities I traveled to and how much I made in those cities, or how many times in a year I traveled to those cities. All of those things are just a couple of clicks with a pivot table, which is now you can see why that's so important to me. Okay, so you can sort, filter, you can use something called a report filter. Let's take a look at sort. So if I want to sort by the amount, you don't see sort in here, you can right-click and do sort, and I'm going to say largest to smallest. So you can sort in your value fields with a right-click. On your row fields, you can just click this and say sort A to Z. So you can sort either or, but if you're in your value fields, you want to sort with the right-click. Here you can just click on the arrow. Filter, same thing. If I just want to filter and show certain products, I can do that same way I would filter in a regular workbook. So you can further customize this report. with sort and filter. Report filter is kind of another way for you to get another type of sort. So we did product. Let's put customer. Here's not a customer, shipping warehouse. So I want to look at all of this, but I only want to look at it by a certain warehouse. So just warehouse D or just warehouse A. Or using this selection, select multiple items, I want to look at warehouses A and B and get the totals for those. So shipping kind of gives you another level. By the way, this can also function as a cheap VLOOKUP. So let me uncheck all of my boxes here up top. Let me add north, south, east, west. I'm going to put in product. I'm going to put in, yeah, where it is, and I'm going to put customer up in report filter. So why I say this is a cheap VLOOKUP, if I just want to look at the transactions for that customer, I'm now just looking up the transactions for that customer by applying a filter. So that's kind of cool. I like that for accounting purposes. All right, so we can sort, we can filter, and we can use report filter. We also have these very cool things, 2010 and forward. I'm not sure on the Mac. I think you have slicers on the Mac in 2016. I'm not sure if you have them in 2011 or not. But slicers. Slicers work very similar to a report filter. Let me unfilter this. And let me remove customer from report filter. And let's do that with a slicer. So from inside my pivot table, I'm going to do insert slicer here. And I want to slice it on customer. So this is what a slicer looks like. It is a very interactive push button way to get that kind of report filter behavior. Now, as you can see, it's kind of jumping around. So as a best practice, I generally tend to anchor my slicer so that when my pivot table changes, my slicer doesn't move. Okay, to me this is less confusing. So that's what a slicer is. You can have multiple slicers even on things you're already using. So if I do a slicer on warehouse, insert slicer warehouse, I can also have, let's do a clear, I'm going to clear. So Berg's shipped out of 3 of the warehouses, A, B, and D, but not C. I'm also going to make this slicer a different color so it becomes easier for me to work in between the 2 slicers. So that's what slicers are. I love them. They're very cool. They make it easier for people to work with your data. If you are using 2013 and beyond and you have date data, which we do, let me get rid of these 2 slicers. We don't need this. You won't see this with 2010, but you do have this with 2013 and beyond, is a timeline. Now, timeline only works with date data, but it allows you to say, in fact, I'm going to put this one up top here. Show me by quarters. Show me quarter 1, 2016. Show me quarter 2 and maybe quarter 1 and 2, 2015. So those are new with the newer versions of Excel. Timeline, it's a different kind of slicer. These are sizable. You can make it days. You can make it months. Show me July and August. I use these extensively when I'm doing projections and cash flow. All right, little discussion on updating pivot tables. When you refresh it, and this depends on the version, in 2010, when you say refresh all, it refreshes all pivot tables that are using the same source. In 2013 and beyond, when you say refresh all, it's going to refresh your pivot tables from all sources. That was a subtle change I did not recognize until recently. So just know what refresh is doing. Refresh is refreshing a pivot table. Now, once you choose refresh all, at least in my experience from there forward, almost all the refreshes seem to be refresh all. So once you use refresh all, you may be locked into that. If you want to validate the data that goes into a data point, so if I'm not really trusting this 1325 here, I can do a double click. It inserts a worksheet and shows me all the data points that went into that number. Now, don't forget to delete this sheet once you've taken a look and you've validated the number, because you don't want to keep that out there. It's just giving you a look back, just a double click, or a right click, show details, either one. But delete it because you don't want to get this confused with your source data. Moving on, pages. So when we put a report filter in, and for this one I'm actually going to take my pivot table data and copy it. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, but I'm going to copy it out to a new book. There we go. And I'm going to create a pivot table by customer, let's say by product and warehouse. Just choose one of those. Okay, by product warehouse. And I want to put customer in report filters over here, but I'm going to do something very clever. I'm going to say I only want to see my customers. And then I'm going to go to the Analyze. This says Options in 2010, by the way. The Analyze tab and the Options drop-down button and say Show Report Filter Pages. Now I want you to watch the bottom of my worksheet here. I want to see a page for each item that I filtered in Customer. Now watch the bottom when I click OK here. It has now created a pivot table for each of those. That's called Report Filter Pages. You're going to, again, either go to the Options tab or the Analyze tab, whichever version you're in. You're going to drop it down. You have to have a report filter in place. Make sure that you've put a report filter in place. If you've left this as all, you are going to get worksheets for every single one of them. So just keep that in mind. And then it will break out each individual page. Now those are no longer linked together. They are individual. Let me go back here. They're individual, so they're not linked together. They are separate pivot tables at this point. If you want to do formulas in pivot tables, these are calculated fields. You can see if you are in your pivot table here on the Analyze tab, you'll see fields, items, and sets. And again, Analyzes Options in 2010. And you'll see calculated field. And we can say, show me, let's say it's some kind of a factor that's something that makes sense to us. And it is north divided by south. I just double-clicked on these items here. And it will add that field to your pivot table. And in fact, to every other pivot table based on that same data. So your formulas are going to be calculated fields. I know I'm going rather quickly here through the end. I'm going to open this up for a few last questions. Pivot charts. You can make charts the same way you would with any data. Insert chart, or from the Analyze tab, pivot chart. You can chart this data. It leaves you with the same selections as you would otherwise have on your pivot table. But notice they are linked together, so whatever you whatever you do in one, it will be linked to, whatever you do in the chart will be linked to the table. So you can do charts on your pivot tables. F11, let me delete this guy. If I use my F11 shortcut, it will create the chart on its own worksheet. It just created it to the left down here. Now, even though it's on its own worksheet, it is still linked to the pivot table. If I choose only certain products, or if I filter it in some other way, that will also change the pivot table. One thing I like to do is to make those the same color so that I keep in mind that those two things are linked. That's just a little tip I do to make sure my pivot tables and pivot charts stay together. Your chart type selections in 2013 and beyond are not the same as in 2010. In 2010, you're going to see them on the ribbon on the Design tab, and you can check Legend. In 2013, you're actually looking at this guy to find all of your axes and chart titles and data labels. That threw me for a loop when I first got that version. Wrapping up with some pivot posers is what I like to call. Why does it do that? Formatting on pivot tables is a real bugaboo. It seems like every time you make a change, the formatting resets. Here's a tip. Don't format from this Home tab. Format from either right-click Value Field Settings using this Format button, or left-click down here in your pivot table and use Value Field Settings and number format from here. This formatting tends to be stickier. It will be more durable. Count versus sum, sometimes when you bring a value into the value field, all it'll give you is a count. And it does that because it can't determine that everything in that column is numeric. Occasionally, you may have a blank, you may have an alpha character, but it says, hey, I don't know if these are all numeric, so I'm just going to make this as a count. You can change it to a sum. You do have date filters to work with. If you have them here, let me get that to tabular form here. So you do have dates that you can work with here, and you have date filters that you can work with here. But your date filters will not work in report filter, so you have to use a slicer. If you're in 2013 and beyond, you can use your date slicers, or you have to create fields. The last pivot poser is that generate get pivot data thing. So when we talk about creating formulas and pivot tables, a lot of people may want to do equal north divided by east, and you get this giant thing here. Get pivot data is actually working on data points, not a cell reference. Very briefly, the way that works here is if I say equal H11, it's going to give me the total. If here I say equal and click, it's going to give me the giant get pivot data. Here's the rub. If I remove a product, this get pivot still finds the total, but this one only finds what's on H11. So if you don't want that functionality, you can always go to your pivot table options and turn off generate get pivot data, and then your pivot data cells will behave like automatic cell references. Now I know many of you are counting on a 4 o'clock stop. I see the trim function. Trim is a single, let me come back here. Trim is a single, yes I did, Judy. Report filter pages to the left, drop down the arrow next to the options button, and you should see report filter pages there. Trim is a single argument formula. We just trim the thing that might have leading and trailing spaces, and what I did finally was a copy-paste values to get the values without the leading and trailing spaces. So I think those were the two questions I had left. I know everyone's counting on a 4 o'clock hard stop, which means we have a whole 2 minutes. or however long I can stay on until Carrie says I'm done. So if you have any questions.
Oh my gosh, Melissa, you should have heard all the wows going on in our room here. All right, so you've got contact info there. I want to thank you. Thank you so much for this class. I learned a million things that I'm sure I can put into use for the rest of the afternoon.
I'm so glad.
All right, any last words for us before we sign off?
Hey, I'm so grateful to have this opportunity to talk to you all, and I hope we get to do this again. Enjoy your new skills, and everybody have a great day.
All right, thank you so much, Melissa. Thank you, and thank you everybody who signed on. All right, we're good to go. I'm going to go ahead and close down the webinar. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Bye-bye.